All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time we're focusing on the Gambia.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Specifically, we're going to be looking at President Barrow and his relationship with the media.
Okay.
Lately, there have been some pretty interesting developments,
Hmm.
like his decision to drop that lawsuit against the Voice newspaper.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. Seemed like a good thing.
Yeah, on the surface, right.
Yeah.
Looks like a win for press freedom, but
But there's got to be more to it.
exactly. We also have this analysis from Rizki-Produkt official TV, and they're highlighting something else.
Like that.
Well, they really dig into the negative impacts of public officials using profanity.
Uh-huh. Like even presidents.
Yep, even presidents, and specifically when it's directed at citizens.
Ah.
So we've got to ask, are these two things connected?
I mean, dropping a lawsuit and then, using bad language, it's kind of contradictory.
Yeah, and what does it all mean for the Gambia? It's a pretty complex situation with a lot of moving parts.
For sure.
So are you ready to dive in and try to untangle it all?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about that dropped lawsuit. We have this article here that's painting it as a potential turning point for Gambia's image.
Okay.
Yeah, like a positive step towards a stronger democracy.
Makes sense.
And it suggests that this move could really empower other media outlets, encourage them to report more freely.
Oh, that's huge.
It is, especially when it comes to holding those in power accountable.
Right, because if the media is afraid to speak out, then who's going to keep the government in check?
Exactly. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think dropping the suit was genuine, like a real commitment to press freedom?
Well, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, it could be a genuine move,
Yeah.
but it could also be a calculated political strategy.
Interesting. So like a way to improve their international reputation.
Exactly. It's all about optics sometimes.
Right. And actions often speak louder than words, as they say.
That's very true.
But still, a free press is essential for any healthy democracy, right?
Absolutely. It's
Right.
like the foundation.
Yeah, the bedrock.
Right. And when you have a free press, when journalists can report without fear, it makes a huge difference.
It makes you wonder if there are other underlying issues in the Gambia.
Well, I think that's where this whole profanity issue comes into play.
Oh yeah, let's get into that. It's definitely another piece of the puzzle here.
It is. It's a big one, actually. Think about it. On one hand, you have this gesture of dropping the lawsuit,
Uh-huh.
which looks good, right? Especially
Yeah.
on the international stage.
Right.
Seems like they're supporting press freedom. But then, on the other hand, you have high-ranking government officials, even the president himself, using language that can be seen as, well, pretty disrespectful.
Yeah. And even threatening at times, right?
Right. And it's directed at the very people they're supposed to represent.
The citizens they're supposed to be serving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just doesn't add up.
It really doesn't. It's like they're giving with one hand and taking away with the other.
That's a great way to put it. And this Rizki-Produkt official TV transcript, it really digs into this. They've got some pretty shocking examples in there. They even quote President Barrow using, well, let's just say, some very colorful language.
Whoa, really? That bad?
It's pretty eyebrow-raising. And what's interesting is how this kind of language, even if it's not a direct threat, it creates this whole atmosphere of fear and intimidation.
Oh, I see what you mean.
And that can be just as effective as censorship, when it comes to silencing dissent.
Wow. So it's like a more subtle form of control.
Exactly. It's all about sending a message. Like, don't step out of line or else.
And if you're a journalist in the Gambia and you see your president talking like that,
You're going to think twice before publishing anything critical.
yeah, for sure. It's a very powerful yet unspoken way to control the narrative.
It really is. And this analysis, they point out that this kind of behavior can actually fuel social unrest.
Oh, how so?
Well, when people feel disrespected or threatened by their leaders, they're less likely to trust them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It can lead to all sorts of problems. Protests, instability, you name it.
So this seemingly small thing, using profanity, can have these huge ripple effects throughout society.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, are these contradictory actions, dropping the lawsuit and using this kind of language, are they actually part of a larger strategy?
Like a calculated move to appease international observers while maintaining control back home.
It's definitely possible. Or maybe it's just a reflection of a deeper disconnect.
A disconnect between the government and the people.
Yeah, like the lack of understanding about how important it is for leaders to model respectful dialogue, to engage with criticism, even when it's tough to hear.
That's a really good point. So we have this tension between two seemingly opposing forces. On one side, There's this move towards a freer press with the Drops lawsuit.
Right.
And then on the other side, there's this undermining of that very freedom through inflammatory language. It's all very fascinating, but also a little bit concerning.
It is, and it raises some important questions about what it really means to support democratic values.
Yeah, is it just about making symbolic gestures? Or is it about consistent action and a real commitment to open dialogue? Those are big questions, and I'm really curious to see how this all plays out.
Me too. This is definitely a situation to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. So, folks, if you're interested in the Gambia and the future of its media landscape, stick with us because we're going to be diving even deeper in the next part of this deep dive.
We'll be looking at the potential consequences of these actions, both for the media and for the country as a whole. It's going to be really interesting.
It is, so don't miss it. We'll be right back after a quick break.
So we've talked about how President Barrow dropping that lawsuit, it could be good for press freedom in the Gambia, but the real question is, will it actually make a difference in the long run?
Right. The article we read, it suggests that other media outlets might feel more empowered to report freely now, but will they actually? What do you think?
It's tough to say. Actions always speak louder than words, you know. Dropping the lawsuit, it's a good first step, but...
But it can't be the only step.
Exactly. If it's not followed up by real, concrete measures to protect journalists.
And to create a safe space for them to do their jobs.
Right. Otherwise, it's just a symbolic gesture.
And that's where this whole profanity issue comes back in, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're a journalist in the Gambia and you've just heard the president using abusive language.
Yeah, how can you feel confident that your right to free speech is actually being protected?
It's a good point. You'd probably be pretty hesitant to criticize the government.
Exactly. And the Rizki-Produkt official TV analysis, they make a really strong point about this. They argue that this kind of language, even if it's not a direct threat, it creates this climate of fear and intimidation.
So it's like, even if there aren't specific laws restricting what journalists can say, there's this underlying pressure to self-censor.
Absolutely. And that can be just as effective as censorship, you know, when it comes to silencing dissent.
Wow, so it's like a psychological barrier to free speech.
Yeah, exactly. Journalists might start avoiding certain topics or, you know, toning down their criticism just to stay safe.
Just to avoid becoming a target.
Right. And the consequences of that, they can be really serious. When journalists are afraid to report freely, well, things can go wrong.
Like corruption could flourish.
Exactly. Human rights abuses might go unchecked.
And the public, they're left in the dark.
Right. They don't have the information they need to hold their leaders accountable.
So we have to ask, what can be done to break this cycle? How can the Gambia really move towards a truly free and vibrant media landscape?
It's a big question, but I think it starts with leadership. President Barrow, he needs to set the tone.
Like he needs to make it clear that he actually supports a free press.
Yes, not just with words, but with actions. He needs to speak out against any attempts to intimidate the media, make sure journalists can do their jobs safely without fear of harassment or violence.
And create a culture where people feel comfortable criticizing the government.
Exactly, where respectful dialogue is valued, even when it's about tough issues. It's a tall order, but it's essential if the Gambia wants to strengthen its democracy.
Couldn't agree more. A free press isn't just a nice to have. It's the foundation of a healthy society.
Absolutely, and it's something that citizens need to be involved in protecting.
That's a great point. It's not just the government's responsibility.
Right. It's up to all of us.
So what can the people of the Gambia do to support journalists and make sure their voices are heard?
That's a great question, and it's something we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll be talking about the power of collective action, the importance of civic engagement, and how citizens can hold their leaders accountable. It's going to be a fascinating discussion.
Welcome back to the show. We've been talking about the media landscape in the Gambia, and it's definitely a complicated situation.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
We've got this seemingly positive move from President Barrow dropping that lawsuit against the Voice newspaper. But then we also have this concerning trend of government officials using profanity, which could have a chilling effect on free speech.
It's a bit of a mixed bag, that's for sure.
It is. So let's talk about solutions. What can ordinary Gambians do to make sure their voices are heard? And to hold their leaders accountable?
Well, I think the first step is staying informed.
Okay, so keeping up with the news.
Yes, but it's more than that. Don't just rely on one source, especially if it's controlled by the government. You got to seek out independent media, read articles from different perspectives.
So being a critical consumer of information.
Exactly. Don't just take everything at face value. Ask questions, do your own research.
Be a savvy newsreader. I like it.
That's the idea. And once you're informed, then you can start taking action.
Okay, so what kind of actions are we talking about?
There are so many ways to get involved. You can write to your elected officials, participate in peaceful protests, or support independent media outlets.
Oh, like subscribing to their publications or donating to their organizations?
Yeah, exactly. And there are tons of civil society organizations in the Gambia, too. They're working on all sorts of issues, from human rights to environmental protection. Find a group that aligns with your values and get involved.
So finding a cause you're passionate about and joining the fight.
Precisely. And don't underestimate the power of just talking to people about these issues.
Oh, like starting conversations with friends and family.
Exactly. Raising awareness, fostering open dialogue, that's all part of it.
It's all about getting people thinking and talking.
Right. And then, of course, there's social media. Love it or hate it, it's become a really powerful tool for organizing and mobilizing people.
It has, especially places where traditional media might be limited, like in the Gambia.
Yeah, social media can be a lifeline for sharing information and connecting with others who want to make a difference.
So if we could sum it all up, what's the key takeaway here? What message would you want to leave our listeners with?
The situation in the Gambia, it's complex, no doubt, but don't let that discourage you. Every single person has the power to make a difference. By staying informed, getting involved in your community, and speaking out against injustice, you can create a brighter future for the Gambia.
That's a powerful message. And you know what? It applies to everyone, everywhere, not just in the Gambia.
You're absolutely right. We can all make a difference in our own corners of the world.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into the Gambia's media landscape. It's been a really insightful conversation.
My pleasure. It's been great talking with you.
And to our listeners, we hope you learned something new and feel inspired to make a positive impact. Keep those minds curious and engaged, folks. Until next time, stay informed and stay active.